Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello and welcome back to the channel where you join me in the fabulous Ikonick Collection here in Miami, Florida today to test drive a car that a lot of you often ask me about, the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren. Almost 2 decades old now. When this launched in the early 2000s, it was very much a hypercar of the time, the collaboration between Mercedes-Benz and the McLaren Formula 1 team to build a road-going Super GT to compete at the time with the likes of the Ferrari Enzo, one of which Barry has in the collection just over there, but also the Porsche Carrera GT, which features in the lineup of the Golf Porsches as well. But given I've recently been very keen on my McLarens, I still own 2, the Senna and the 675 LT, and I've had a number of others, but also my Mercedes-Benzes, or rather my AMGs, surely the SLR, being the ultimate collaboration between the two brands, should be a car of interest to one day consider adding to the Shmeemobiles. Well, today let's take a look at one of the early SLR Coupes and take it out for a drive from the Ikonick Collection to see what it's all about and think whether one day that might happen. If you're wondering why on earth I am wearing sunglasses indoors, it is because, as always, I am bedazzled by Barry's incredible collection. No, seriously, I have a problem at the moment with one of my eyes, so excuse me for that. But here at Ikonick, we have the Mercedes cars, including another SLR, the dark green Roadster, sitting directly opposite the McLaren. So let's have a very quick look at what we have here, starting with the cerulean blue P1, one of 375, then one of 500 Sennas, this car in the full exposed carbon fibre. Next to that, one of 75 of the Senna GTRs for the track, the race version. Then we have the 720S, and directly opposite them we have the Mercedes. Normally the silver SLR Coupe would be living side by side of the Roadster, which came out a number of years later. We have 2 of the Black Series models, the SL65 AMG Black Series and the SLS AMG Black Series, and then the 2 newer GTRs, the AMG GTR Original Beast of the Green Hell and the GTR Pro, one of 750. But what happens when you combine Mercedes-Benz with McLaren at the time, although technically before McLaren Automotive was around as we know it now, this is the result. The SLR Sportlight Racing, as it translates from German, the collaboration between the two that launched in 2003. Now at the time, Mercedes-Benz had a 40% stake in the McLaren Formula 1 team, so these were actually assembled at Woking, the home of McLaren in the UK, coming about 10 years after the F1 had been introduced, which of course is an absolute legend, but very much a collaboration between the two, new technologies, but distinctly Mercedes-Benz design, and in fact a design that has also gone on to inspire further Mercedes models that came out afterwards, like the SLK of the era with this sharp pointed nose, the substantial difference being quite how long that bonnet is. It is truly a GT with the seating position right back towards the rear axle, a very long wheelbase, and housing up front, which we'll see in a moment. The bonnet actually opens forwards, which is quite unusual. A 5.4 litre supercharged V8 making 626 horsepower. There are some amazing design details though. As you look around, you can see all of the gills for the airflow. We've got side exit exhausts, which sound incredible, a very deep grumble. You've got the turbine style wheels, a very iconic wheel design. And of course, in supercar style, butterfly doors. You give a press just here, the doors pop open and go outwards, greeting us with an interior that is sporty but still luxurious as well. You can see we've got the bucket seats and technology that by modern standards is of course a little bit out of date, but understandable given that this is approaching 20 years old. But what's fascinating to me though is what it's like to drive, because that power goes through a 5-speed automatic gearbox to the rear wheels, but by modern standards again, when we're comparing with a world of dual clutches or even manual gearboxes for the engagement, a 5-speed auto is perhaps a little bit dated. I think it stood the test of time though in terms of the appearance. It's a fantastic looking thing. So I guess in a second we'll get it unplugged from the trickle charger. We'll pull the car out. We've got the Icon A5 and the Porsche just in front to move and shuffle out of the way first. Actually, before we do that, let's have a look at the bonnet. I want to show you a little bit of this process because it is really very cool. So pop open the door. Of course, we've got the catch just down here somewhere, he says. Need to find that, give it a pull, pop that open, close the door back down. For the moment, this is where it's definitely going to be a little bit of a challenge because you actually have catches on 2 sides that you need to release. I think you have to do them simultaneously, he says. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. It's the challenge. Then the whole front clam opens forwards, carefully does it, to there, into position. Look at this headlight cut out as well, and the badge from the bonnet. And then it folds up and forwards. Check this out, a full carbon fibre bonnet to reveal that 5.4 litre supercharged V8. incredible. Obviously a very, very fast car, 200 miles an hour, top end, lots of carbon fibre as you can see, lots of CFRP as well used in the construction to reduce weight. But that's the power plant that I think is really something very special. Let me close this back down delicately for the moment as well, make sure I get it all right, especially when I've got the camera rolling. And then to shut this part, you effectively slide it back until it's about there and then drop it. And that's closed, back into place. So like I said, we'll get it started and pull the SLR on out. Listen to that, the deep, thunderous grumble of the Mercedes-McLaren SLR. We'll pull the car on outside then, and there'll be time to take this beast for a little drive to experience what it's like. See the iconic silver arrows style, silver paintwork with the red leather interior. It's such a deep grumble that it makes. Out into the sunshine on a beautiful day to take a car like this for a drive. It is my turn then. Let's hop on board, which I can tell you in the SLR is not the easiest thing in the world. The gap that you have between the steering wheel and the sill is actually a little bit of a squeeze. So let me get myself inside here, sat nice and low in the car, pull the door down, and the door releases, by the way, along with the seat controls are tucked in just there. Then to start it, the key goes into the dash, and you could turn it all the way on with that, or you can use this infinitely cool button on the top of the shifter to start the car. Sounds so good. And another thing to show you here, this, by the way, is for the rear wing position. So if I press it down, it does the test and puts the wing all the way up, and then lets it back down, which is kind of nice. You can say thank you to people who have let you out or something with that. Anyway, let's close this, let's take the car out, let's go for a drive then in the SLR. The thing that I immediately need to say about this driving experience is that being sat so far back with about a mile of bonnet in front of me is the strangest sensation. The other thing that's very strange is how the pedals feel from the throttle, which is very lazy. You have to give it a proper press before anything really happens, to the brake, which similarly doesn't respond very quickly until you're really firmly pressing down on it. But then we're off, we're cruising in an SLR. I have driven an SLR before, but I must confess it was about 5 or 6 years ago, so I don't actually remember it as well as I should. But the overwhelming sensation is that if I thought the SLS and the AMG GTR had a long bonnet, this is kind of, I have no idea where the front of that bonnet goes. And the other thing is there are gigantic B-pillars, so it's quite hard to actually be able to see out on a slightly diagonal junction that I'm going to pull out of just here. But let's get on the move. Listen to that. Obviously driving an automatic 5-speed, that's the strange thing, because nowadays we have cars with 9 or even 10 gears. This only has 5. We're in comfort. The mode selector changes the settings for the gearbox, so you can go into manual or you can go into sport. If I do put it into manual and just drop down some gears with basically the buttons on the back of the steering wheel, not really paddle shifters as we know them on more modern cars. I think the idea here, and it's not the fastest response either, the idea here is that you leave it in auto and you let the car effectively do its thing, knowing that you're driving somewhere in supreme style in an SLR. This is so cool. I mean, this was a poster car, right? At about the time I was looking at what my first car was going to be, which of course was a Renault Clio, not exactly a Mercedes SLR McLaren, but this was a car that was out when I was playing games as a teenager. You know, it was the cover car on a number of different titles. Oh, a bright green Hurricane. Verde Scandal just went through. It was an Evo rear-wheel drive. This was really a very, very, very iconic car, and I think it always will be an iconic car because it didn't really have a predecessor. It was inspired by the Mercedes cars from back in the 50s, you know, the 300 SLR, the Stirling Moss era, that kind of epic success story that Mercedes had back then. And obviously they made the Stirling Moss variant of this, which was significantly lighter by having no roof. The SLR came, it was followed by the 722, which was 722, Stirling Moss's start time. That was then followed by the SLR Roadster, which was then followed by the 722S, of which they made 150, the Roadster variant of the 722, and of course the 75 unit run of the SLR Stirling Moss that came after that, which has always been one of my favourite standout cars. It's very much GT. Hyper GT of the era, do we call it Hyper GT? I referenced Super GT earlier, but 600 odd horsepower back then That was a lot, and it was also, of course, a very expensive car back at the time, and it still remains to be a very expensive car to run, which is one of the big topics of discussion that I alluded to about whether one of these could ever become a Shmeemobile, for example, because the running costs on an SLR are insane. From, if anything gets damaged, the costs to repair any component on the car. For example, I've been led to believe the bonnet, the full carbon fibre bonnet or the hood, is about $100,000, that kind of thing, to even brakes. Brakes are 20, 30,000 or so, something like that, to the servicing, to everything. They are very, very expensive cars, which is why they haven't necessarily appreciated in outright value as the Enzo and the Carrera GT, which are very, very different cars. The Enzo had the Ferrari F1 pedal shift, the 6-speed pedal shift, the Carrera GT a manual, and this the automatic. So those three cars, that was really the holy trinity of 2004, which is interesting thinking back, long before I was uploading content about cars, of course. For the moment, I mean, it just feels actually like a surprisingly easy car to use and to live with. Maybe not to drive in a super dynamic way, but just to cruise here through Miami. This is pleasant and easy and a bit of a delight, to be honest, and it just feels so cool being sat this far back. The gold Bentayga. It just feels so cool. With that grumble, it's not the loudest thing, it's not crazy. Just wait for it to drop down a gear and give it a little bit of a kick. Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, to get a feel for what this car is like. If I turn it back up to sport then, very quickly, sportier settings on the gearbox, I guess it just holds onto the gears a little bit longer. The Supercharger Whine as well when you get higher up through the revs. Of course, at the lower speeds, we're not going to be hearing much of that. If I press down firmer on the throttle, we get the kick down. That sounds really cool. Hearing that whine, I would just need a much more open road to be able to experiment with a little bit more of it. In fact, if I open the window very quickly, because obviously the exhausts are there, they're right almost next to me. Yeah, there's nothing else that really sounds like that. In first gear, tell you what, it's a little bit slidey though. I am on quite old tyres, so I do need to keep my wits about me, but pointing the wheel straight in first gear here. That is a really cool sound. That very, very low grumble. It's a funny car, you know. I think it's super cool, but it's very much pop it into comfort and drive it gently, as opposed to try and treat it like a sports supercar. This is daily Grand Tourer, distinct special car. I mean, there are 2,176 of them in total, I believe. So not exactly a lot of cars, and that includes the different derivatives and special versions that they made. And lots of those are silver, obviously carbon ceramic brakes, so excuse that. I don't really know what I expected from this drive, but it's very, very lazy. It's very, very relaxed. Not the most responsive, but that was the character that they were going for. And it's interesting to think then that the two companies spawning in the different directions went to cars like the SLS Black Series and the GTR Pro and GT Black Series, and then on the other hand to the P1, Senna, Speedtail and other McLaren models, because those are very, very, very sporty cars, whereas this is a segment that isn't covered quite so much in the modern world, I think, in the current iteration, because it's so chilled. I mean, the seats are actually pretty comfortable. It just has some strange quirks about it, which I need to show you a little bit more of afterwards. But it does make me wonder, you know, it's a cool thing in terms of how it looks, what it represents, the history behind it. Not necessarily a car, though, that I would want to use on a regular basis. It's not the car that I would want to go on long distance drives around Europe personally in the way that I've used my SLS Black Series, for example, which I guess is why subconsciously it's never stood out, because I must have had an inkling as to what the car was like. I just do think it looks spectacular, and I do think it will be very iconic in the future, because it was really at the forefront of technology, lightweight materials, although even though it has the CFRP construction and carbon fibre usage, it's still 1,750 kilos, which is not exactly light. He says as he notices the 911 convertible alongside, taking a proper look at this, because you don't see things like this that often, and that's what makes it really stand out, and I think would make it really cool in the collection,
Just I need to get a better idea of those running costs, because that's definitely, you know, something you have to be very, very conscious of. But driving like this is just a delight. It's just a nice, pleasant thing to enjoy, you know. It just cruises. It's not loud. You can get some very loud exhaust systems that I've heard in the past, like the Mansouri cars, for example, but yeah, it goes about business very, very, very pleasantly. I would definitely like it if they made a refreshed version of this. A car that did what this does, but with a dual clutch, so it's more responsive and it shifts quicker and has more dynamic capability as a result. I mean, it's not like I've been throwing it through corners, because we're here in Florida and all the roads are straight, here in Miami in particular, so not the most exciting place by any stretch of the imagination to try and give you a constructive impression of what this is like to drive. Then you get on the brakes, you do feel it pitching quite a long way forwards. Ignore the squeaks from the carbon ceramics, and remember to stop well back behind the line, because of course the bonnet is extending way out there somewhere. I do find the brake pedal very strange, because obviously it creeps, so if you lift off the brake it starts moving forwards, but it's very hard to find where exactly that bite point is, because it's very, very soft at first, and then you get to this very firm latter tail end of it. If we put the foot down again though, I'm not sure how much of the Supercharger whine you can hear through the cameras, but inside it's a very cool sound. You only get it up towards the higher end of the rev range, of course, when the Supercharger is really kicking in, and the ride going over some of the smaller bumps is pretty nice as well. Fits the character, being a GT, of course. That's obviously what the intention was behind this. We're talking a car that does 200 miles an hour. This is not a slow thing, but again, back on the brakes, it's really, really hard to modulate the braking. I imagine when you're driving it, ignore that. When you're driving it in anger, it's a different sensation, but the pressure of the brake pedal is unusual. It's taking some getting used to, and equally the throttle, because you have to give it more of a press to get the car moving than you might instinctively think. Being sat in here, the mirrors are cool as well, the way they stick out from the A-pillars. Just the small little mirrors. It's all the little details, isn't it, that make something like this so special, that make it, well, in this case, one of the rare Mercedes cars of this nature. I actually really want to drive this in a more sporty way now. We've got some train tracks here, so it's probably going to be... No, you see, that's not all that bad. That rides over those fairly comfortably. If you throw it as much as you can for Florida into a corner, yeah, you feel the front just dipping away a little bit, as you might expect. Things like the BMW Z8 do that, because they're built for comfort, not for out-and-out track performance, and that's where the 722 steps up a little bit more, if that's the objective at the end of the day. Anyway, we're heading back to Ikonick so I can show you some of these other features of this car that stand out. One of the cool things then about the exhaust tailpipes being right there is that if you open up the door, it means all of the sound is coming from just in front of you, right out the front. Let's take a quick little listen to some blips. It sounds good, and I can even feel the heat coming off that as well. But inside, it's simple, it's not overly complicated. Things like having the media controls tucked away behind that flap. It's all, I think, about the drive, about looking cool, and there are some very, very nice details. Obviously, we have old school analog dials. I'm missing almost analog dials on new cars. We have a steering wheel, which does look pretty dated, I'm not gonna lie, with very basic controls. In fact, I'm just gonna shut it off for the second, take out the key, pop that in my pocket, the older style Mercedes key, not too dissimilar, I guess, from the GT Black Series key, but not like the new S-Class one. Then inside, you've got the large air conditioning vents, just a few controls for the driving, for the wing testing, then your climate controls down towards the bottom. By the shift lever, your mirror controls, and a few other buttons here in the center. Manual handbrake, but otherwise we've got the red and black dual tone of leather. We've got the slightly off color, if you ask me, Alcantara headliner, but behind there are some interesting storage options behind the carbon fiber back bucket seats here, because on this, if you press the lower button, that's for this storage area, which has the holder for the old school style flip telephone that used to come with the car. But if you press the button for the top half, that actually opens this storage area, which goes in quite deep and gives you an opportunity to put some things up there in the rear shelf, which I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know. I guess you've got the hinges for that just tucked in over that way. But inside, all pretty nice, not overly complicated, other than trying to get out. It's much easier if you slide the seat back to just give a touch more space to be able to get out of this gap under the steering wheel, which, believe me, is the most awkward thing about this car, is actually managing to get out of it. The doors themselves go up right to the roof, so you don't have any wind noise, more in keeping with the spirit of the car when you're driving by having that fully sealed. I think the colour of this car
in the metallic silver, and the sunshine right now, glistening away, looks superb. And to me, there's something so special about the original SLR. Yes, the 722, the 722S, and even the Roadster came afterwards, but this was how it arrived. This was the iconic SLR look, and probably what I would be tempted to consider in the future. Now, a little bit more about that. Will an SLR at some point in the future join the Shmeemobiles? Well, I think in all honesty, as I've said, I wouldn't really use it as much as I think a car like this deserves to be used, or as I would do with some of the other cars in the garage, which wouldn't really justify the costs associated with keeping them and maintaining them, because I always like to do all of my cars as per the book, with the break-ins, with the annual services, with whatever it may be. And obviously, as I've said, these get pretty expensive. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it looks epic, and one day I would love one of these to be sandwiched in my collection between the McLarens and the Mercedes cars. I just don't see it happening in the near future, because I don't think it's something I'd use so much, even though it looks this incredible, parked out here in the sunshine here in Miami. Truly, truly stunning, and it's a big part of the history for both brands. For McLaren, going from the F1 to this, to McLaren Automotive as we know them now, and even Mercedes prompting some of their other products and technologies that have gone into their truly fabulous lineup as well. I'd like to say a big thanks, as always, to Barry Skolnick and the team here at Ikonick Collection for the opportunity to take that out, to experience what it's about, to learn a little bit more about Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren. That's it for now, though. Thank you very much for watching. As always, guys, I appreciate your support an awful lot, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers!